Good afternoon and welcome to the September 21st Hillsborough EPC Commission meeting. I will call this meeting to order and ask Commissioner Donna Cepeda to start with the Pledge of Allegiance and invocation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you for this time. We thank you for who you are. And we pray today a special blessing on two people that have served here faithfully in the county, Laura Woodard and Sterling Woodard. As they're about to retire, we ask you to bless their lives. And we just thank you for them. We pray much success and much joy. And we just thank you for all that they have done, their life of service. And we ask you to bless their lives greatly. And we ask you to bless this meeting in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. All right. And before we take roll call, I'm going to read Commissioner Hagan's memorandum to the board to please be advised that he will not be in attendance at this afternoon's meeting due to a previously scheduled event. And with that, I will take a roll call vote.
Wostel?
Here.
Cepeda?
Here.
Cohen?
Here.
Hagan? Kemp? Myers?
Here.
Owen?
Here.
You have a quorum, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Commissioner, there are no changes.
All right. Do we have any items for removal of consent?
No, Commissioner.
No. All right, then we will go ahead and proceed with the recognitions and proclamations. And I'll just have the clerk note that Commissioner Kemp has arrived.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Again, we're here today to honor Laura and Sterling Woodard for a lifetime of service. They do everything together, including retiring together. They are both professional engineers, and their combined service to the EPC and the citizens of Hillsborough County equates to 61 years of service. They met in college and have been married for over 39 years. They have 3 adult children, Eric and Matthew, who are both practicing attorneys in Texas, and Faith, who is a television news anchor in Little Rock, Arkansas. They have their son-in-law, Dre, and they have 2 wonderful grandchildren, if you ever get the chance to meet them. They're delightful, named Noah and Micah. So with that, we're going to bring up Laura first, and I wanted to have Sam El-Rabi, the water director, and Tony Alhamzi come forward to help me confer Lifetime of Achievement to Laura. And Laura's here too. Great, come on up. Sterling, you want to stand up here, or are you going to wait? I'll stand. Laura Chenault Woodard is a native of Tampa, Florida, and is from a family of 10 siblings. She is a licensed professional PE engineer in Florida and has served as team lead for the Domestic Wastewater Collection System Permitting Program in the Water Division, which was responsible for the regulation of water pollution sources within Hillsborough County. Laura was with the EPC for more than 28 years, but has more than 36 years of experience in wastewater engineering. She began her career as a design engineer in 1987 with Metcalf and Eddy Incorporated in Tampa after graduating from the University of Central Florida with a BS in civil engineering in 1986. Laura was the first African-American female to graduate from UCF with a civil engineering degree. Afterwards, Laura worked as a design engineer with HDR Engineering, where she obtained her professional engineering license. Laura left consulting in 1995 to join the EPC in the Water Division as a domestic wastewater permitting engineer, where she became the first female African-American professional engineer in Hillsborough County government. In addition, Laura has used her extensive engineering experience at the EPC in the environmental permitting of thousands of local pumping stations and sanitary sewer collection systems, as well as high-profile projects, including the permitting of the county's first vacuum sewer system. In addition, Laura served as the EPC's lead in the application review for the major expansion of the county's largest wastewater treatment facility, now located in Odessa. Because of her years of experience and technical expertise, Laura also serves as the EPC chair of the engineering group, which was created by the executive director to enhance the skills, knowledge, and cooperation between the agency engineers. Laura is an exceptional engineer and has been a valued member of the environmental community and the EPC family. And with that, if somebody could grab her Lifetime Achievement Award. There you go, Sam. They each picked their own. We have a lot of nature photographers, and they get to go and pick what they want on their Lifetime Achievement Award. But this Lifetime Achievement Award says, the EPC Lifetime Achievement Award is presented to Laura C. Woodard, PE. Thank you for over 28 years of dedicated service to EPC and the citizens of Hillsborough County. You are loved, and we will miss you, your EPC family. It says September 1st, 2023, because they're actually retired. We'll let Sam hold that, and we'll let you say a few words if you want.
Okay.
We'll bring Sterling.
Thank you, everyone, and Janet, for those kind words. And commissioners, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules today
Get it up to your level.
to help honor Sterling and myself. Unfortunately, I haven't had an opportunity to work closely with most of you commissioners, but I thank you for your hard work that you provide to service the citizens of Hillsborough County on a daily basis. And thank you to my EPC family, including my coworkers, managers, and directors. In particular, Janet, Sam, and Tony, who, because of their leadership and the roles that they've played, have been vital into making my EPC career a wonderful experience. In carrying out the agency's mission, it allowed me the opportunity to do my part in protecting the citizens of Hillsborough County. And I really enjoyed that and really value that as part of my career. In particular, Janet, I thank you so much for your leadership, and because of your care and concern that you provide to your staff daily, you've become an icon, I think, at EPC for professionalism and just having a caring heart and care for your employees. Lastly, I do want to thank and honor my fellow co-worker, husband, and soulmate, Sterling. Sterling encouraged me 28 years ago to come to EPC. And since that time, he's endured daily rides to work in with me, eating lunch every day, and riding home together every day for 28 years, and he didn't complain. So I thank him for that. In fact, Sterling was the one who introduced me to the field of engineering back in 1979 as a college freshman. And since that time, Sterling has continued to be my #1 encourager, confident, and is truly the winds beneath my wings. So I pray to God today that he bless our retirement just as he's blessed our lives and our careers. So thanks again to each and every one of you for taking the time out to help honor us. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
I'm vertically challenged. Their children would be here today, but they're at a Beyonce concert in Dallas, Texas. So, but they'll be here for their celebration next week, which had to be postponed because of the hurricane. And before I get into just, recognizing Sterling for his lifetime achievement. I just want to thank you, Laura. They've become my family, really, since my husband passed away. These guys are the most amazing people you'll ever find. And, you get to learn something new every day, Sterling. I didn't know your middle name was Keith until about an hour ago. So we'll go on and tell you that Sterling Keith Woodard was born in Tallahassee, Florida, and raised in Winter Haven, Florida. He recently retired as the EPC's Air Division Director. The Air Division is responsible for the regulation of air pollution sources within Hillsborough County. Sterling has 33 years of experience in air pollution and environmental regulation. And before I continue my remarks, I know there are people from the Air Division here. Sahand, will you come up? Michelle, everybody from the Air Division, come on up. You're here for the noise rule anyway. Come stand here. I think Wetlands is here too, because he went down to Wetlands too. So come on, Wetlands. Y'all stand up here. That's what EPC is all about. You stand there, Sam. His selection of the Air Director in 2018 made him the third Air Division Director, and most notably, EPC's first African-American Director. He is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Florida and has a Bachelor of Science degree in engineering from the University of South Florida. Sterling began his environmental career at EPC in 1991 as an air permitting engineer. In addition to serving as director of the Air Division, Sterling also served as the director of the Wetlands Division for a year and a half before returning as the director of the Air Division. And I'd just like to say I've called on Sterling to do many special projects, including going down to wetlands. He does everything flawlessly. He helped with the Sterling Award, came in on weekends when I was first there 8 years ago. He's an amazing person. Sterling retired on September 1st and leaves a legacy of over 3 decades of prestigious service to the EPC and the environmental community. During his professional career, Sterling acted as the agency's lead on a number of significant environmental regulatory initiatives, including the TECO Natural Gas Repowering Enforcement Case in 1998, the first of its kind EPA Wetland Grant Report, the installation of a sound barrier wall at the amphitheater, and the 2022 Gopher Resource Enforcement Action that resulted in the largest penalty assessment in EPC's history. Among his many accomplishments, Sterling is most proud of the fact that after more than 40 years of progressive regulation, Hillsborough County is in compliance with all of the national ambient air quality standards. And that just happened a couple of years ago. And so that is a testament to his service. Before I present the award, I just want to thank you guys so much. Sterling has been a spiritual pillar to me, somebody I rely on, somebody I go to, and Laura as well. Laura can get only a few words in when Sterling's around. She did a great job earlier. But when Laura says something, it's extremely profound. So we're going to honor them in a celebration at the agency next week. We hope you can attend. But somebody will get Sterling's award. There you go. And this was the picture that Sterling picked.
Laura picked.
Oh, Laura picked it. Okay. You truly know what it means to be happily married. The EPC Lifetime Achievement Award is presented to Sterling K. Woodard, PE, in recognition of a lifetime of dedicated service and your 33-year commitment to protecting natural resources for the citizens of Hillsborough County. Love and best wishes, your EPC family, September 1st, 2023.
I guess I don't have to raise it up too much, but commissioners, I just want to thank you for allowing me to be here today. We've been retired for about 3 weeks, and I still wake up every morning and go, wow, I don't have to go to work. And at the end of the night, and when we get ready to go to bed at night, I say to myself, wow, I can stay up as late as I want because I don't have to go to work in the morning. My career at the EPC was just something I could have never dreamed of. It's something that I actually thought about, as a young boy growing up in Winter Haven, wanting to be an engineer to fulfill my mother's dream of becoming an engineer. So every day that I worked, I was not only walking in my path and my dream, but I was walking in hers because she was the person who taught me what it was to be a good engineer. But I was fortunate in the fact that when I came to the EPC, it was a job that I prayed for. I had interviewed for a number of different jobs with consultants, you know, because Laura worked at a consulting company. But when I interviewed at the EPC, I asked God to give me that job because I met Ivan Kornienko, Jerry Campbell, who was the assistant director at the time, and a guy named Daryl Graziani. They were my mentors, and they taught me how to be a really, really good engineer. So everything that I've learned since then, I've had many mentors throughout my career, but they were the ones who taught me and showed me that the EPC was a special place. And it wasn't just because of the staff, but it was because of the commission. The commissioners who would take their time to change their hats from being members of the Board of County Commissioners and actually become EPC, Environmental Protection Commission commissioners, which meant that they had to sometimes do things that, you know, was a little different, okay, but in the interest of promoting the environment. So I just want to thank all of you for the role that you play because you helped set the pattern for this agency. And I would have never stayed here for 33 years had it not been for the environment and the family atmosphere. Because every day that I went to work, it allowed me and my wife to raise our kids, to support them in all of their dreams and efforts. So I get choked up because I have lived my dream, and I've lived my dream with the woman of my dreams. We worked together. I would have to sometimes tell people, hey, I can't go to lunch because I'm going to lunch with Laura. And they would say, well, wait a minute, don't you get tired of going to lunch every day? I said, look, if you knew who she was, you'd never get tired of being around her either. And I just want to thank her for being the strength and being my friend and being my supporter all these years. I remember when, and I'll wrap it up. I remember when earlier this year in March, we were asked by the Pulitzer Committee, which actually awards journalistic awards for journalistic excellence. They were having the first of its kind, I guess, presentation up in Madison, Wisconsin to recognize the Tampa Bay Times for their environmental exposés on gopher industries. And they also had some other newspapers that were there, but they invited the EPC to come up, and me and Janet specifically to come up, because the Pulitzer Committee did not quite understand how, during the gopher investigation, how we as a government agency cooperated and worked together with the Tampa Bay Times to try to improve the situation and the problems that were at the facility. And I remember when I spoke to the administrator of the Pulitzer Committee, she said the reason why they won the award is because they had never seen or they had never heard of a government agency working together to try to solve a problem. That usually when things happen, people try to cover up, they try to, obfuscate or whatever. But they wanted the people of the Pulitzer Committee and they wanted other reporters to know what the EPC was. We're a local environmental agency and they are a national organization. But when I was there, I remember telling them what our agency was. We're about transparency. We're about integrity. We're about honesty. We're about environmental excellence. And when I was there, I thought about every one of you and all the other commissioners and all the other staff who has ever worked at the EPC. I was there representing all of us. And I just want you to know the look that was on their faces. And when I talked to the professors and the journalists and other people, they just could not believe our agency was the way it was. So I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to live out my dream, for giving me the opportunity to find a purpose and to be a part of something bigger than myself. But most of all, I want to thank all the people who have trained and mentored me, Dr. Garrity, Roger Stewart, but most especially Janet, who has given me the opportunity to do something that my mother was so proud of. She passed last year. But she told me, she said, Sterling, she said, that lady who is your boss, that's what she said. She said, she's a good woman. I said, Mama, I agree. She's a great person. Her leadership and her skill set is such that she's the right person that they chose about 8 years ago to lead this agency where it needs to go. So I want to thank you all, to my colleagues. I love you. To my coworkers, you're the best. And please keep this agency the way it is, because if you put a light on a hill, then others will see the light and come to it. So thank you, and I love you all.
Commissioner Myers?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to say to my extended family, Sterling and Laura, we met many, many years ago at church. Many, many years ago at church. And when I met them, they said they were working at EPC, and I was a county employee. And you all have not changed. You continue to show the love for Hillsborough County, the love for your family. I just want to thank you all for your service to EPC and the Hillsborough County government. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers. Commissioner Spada?
Yes, so I just wanted to thank you both, Mr. and Mrs. Woodard, for your many years of service also. And I just pray that you'll have, and you can just see your precious hearts, and I just pray you'll have many years of long and healthy life. And God bless you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Kim?
And that was so moving and such an incredible love story to hear. Thank you so much. To you, Laura, I wasn't as familiar as you said. You really haven't been engaged with the commission so much. So it was great to hear that story about you. And it is so unusual still to this day to see a woman, any woman, as engineers. It's still a rare thing. Thank you both for your impactful service. I'd say, to within the agency, obviously, but in Hillsborough County, but also just creating a better world and a better environment and lifting us all up. So it's just been wonderful, and thank you.
Commissioner Owen?
Well, I just want to thank you, too, for all your service to this county and to EPC. And, I'm a newly elected official, and so I'm one of those that hasn't had the opportunity or pleasure to work with you. I hope it's not because I got elected you decided to retire. But really, what's a testament to me is what your coworkers and the people around you, how they feel. And I can tell they love you. So I can tell Janet, your family to them. So thank you for your service. The only thing I'll disagree with you, Sterling, is you said that we set the pattern, for the EPC, and I would say it's folks like you that do that. So thank you.
Very good. Commissioner Cohen?
And I just want to add my thank you as well. The warmth that comes through from the EPC when we have these ceremonies is really very palpable. I'm starting to wonder who's going to be left based on how many really wonderful careers we've marked here. But, certainly on behalf of all of us, thank you for everything, and thank you for leaving our environment in better shape than you found it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Are we going to grab a picture real quick?
Okay, do we have the commissioners? Can I see everybody's faces? Commissioner Myers in between? Okay, great. That's good. That's okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, and while we reset, a few notes prior to the public comment. We have 2 public hearings regarding rulemaking today. If you have comments for either rule, please hold your comments until that portion of the meeting. All other public comments not related to the rule can be given in this first comment section. Shortly, the Commission will conduct a final order hearing to consider exceptions to the recommended order in the Anderson versus Jurin and EPC wetland permitting case. That is not a public hearing. But if any party or member of the public does choose to discuss the case during this public comment portion of our agenda, they are not allowed to introduce new evidence. Your comments should merely be limited to whether you support or oppose issuance of the permit. If you begin to tread into new evidence, EPC Council will ask you to not discuss the new evidence. With that in mind, the EPC will now allow members of the public to provide public comment on any matters relevant to the EPC, but for the rulemaking items. And first, we will welcome Mrs. Barbara Walker, who is virtual.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Honorable Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to be heard. My name is Barbara Walker. I live at 3019 Bradford Circle in Palm Harbor. I've been living in Tampa Bay for 54 years. I have been an active member of the conservation community for 20 of those years, including being a stakeholder on the Florida Sandhill Crane Draft Management Plan. Currently, I'm a state-permitted wildlife rehabilitator and the president of Tampa Bay Raptor Rescue. I want to encourage the Commission to fully recognize how important Alafaya River watershed and the various creeks are to Florida sandhill cranes. Florida sandhill cranes are state-listed as threatened. I strongly recommend that Hillsborough County follow all rules regarding this species, as they have been impacted by habitat loss, but also by habitat degradation. Every little change in a sandhill crane's territory can impact their success raising young, and some of those changes result in a take. In Hillsborough County, suitable habitat for cranes can be found from the beginning of the Alafaya River to deep into the county's eastern edge. Aside from habitat loss and degradation, sandhill cranes are susceptible to fertilizer, pesticides, and herbicides. I'm asking that the EPC follow all county, state, and federal rules. In the future, I will be addressing the Commission about rodenticide and other pertinent topics, and I once again thank you for being heard.
All right, thank you very much, ma'am. Are there any other speakers in the audience that arrived after we began that are not here to speak on the 2 rulemaking hearings? No? All right, then that will conclude public comment. We will move on to approval of the consent agenda. There were no items that were to be removed from consent. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, I have a motion by Commissioner Cohen and a second by Commissioner Kemp. Please cast your votes.
Motion carried 6-0.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we are going to move on now to our public hearing section of the meeting. And Mr. Marati?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you. Yes, Commissioners, the following 2 public hearings are regarding rulemaking that you'll be hearing about regarding noise and waste. They have both been properly noticed in the newspaper pursuant to Section 5 of the EPC Act. In fact, we chose to actually advertise them in 2 different papers just to spread out the notice a little better. At this point, Ms. Thornton will now introduce the presenters.
Thank you, Rick. We will be moving to 8A, and that's to conduct a public hearing to consider proposed amendments to EPC's Waste Management Rule, Chapter 1-7, the Rules of EPC, and I'm going to call up Ron Cope to give that presentation.
Ronald Cope, EPC staff with the agency's Waste Division.
Yeah, just, you can raise it up too if you want.
Good. I'm here this afternoon, Commissioners, to provide a brief overview of the changes proposed to the EPC's Chapter 1-7, the EPC's Waste Management Rule. Before I get into any of the specifics, however, related to the proposed updates, I'd first like to provide a bit of background. Chapter 1-7 was initially adopted in 1978, and that version was a bit general, providing broad requirements associated with solid waste management facilities and the overall management of solid waste in Hillsborough County.
Ron, let me interrupt. Are you advancing your slides, or is James
Oh,
Brewer?
I did it the last time, too,
Okay,
didn't
that's
I, boss?
okay. That's so everyone's on the same page.
There we go.
Oh, James retired. Okay, so another retirement. Okay, well, there you go. Somebody else, but okay.
1978, the rule was initially adopted. It was quite general, providing broad requirements associated with solid waste management facilities and the overall management of solid waste in Hillsborough County. The rule was amended in 1995 to include revisions adopting state solid waste regulations and permitting requirements related to solid waste management facilities and related to the redevelopment of historic solid waste disposal sites that we commonly call old landfills.
We lost your slides.
We lost them?
Yeah, just hold on a minute.
I didn't do it.
I know.
So do they know they're advancing my slides? Okay. That's why I do it that way. Sam, raise the podium up.
Okay. You can't hear me very well. Okay.
Stand by, Commissioner. We're going to put it up on the slides upstairs for you.
There you go.
Am I still in?
So you'll just say next slide.
No, you just say next slide.
There you go.
Okay. You should have it up there right now. So just when you're ready to advance, you say next slide. Someone will do it upstairs.
All right, thank you. Okay, we went through the initial adoption in 78, correct? The rule was amended in 1995 to include revisions adopting solid waste regulations and permitting requirements related to solid waste management facilities and related to the redevelopment of historic solid waste disposal areas, also known as old landfills. In 2002, the rule was again, this is not the correct slide.
Yeah, it is.
I'm still
You're
on the history.
You're there.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking
you
at
need
this.
to look up. Yeah, close it.
In 2002, the rule was again amended, and this amendment included notable revisions that for all purposes resulted in the current rule that we observe today. This rule included substantial updates associated with our historic solid waste disposal area or old landfill redevelopment program and our program associated with yard trash processing facilities. The rule was again updated in 2012 with this amendment including corrections to state regulation references and the inclusion of requirements associated with the EPC's delegated brownfields program. Next slide, please. The purpose of the current proposed revisions, Commissioners, is to provide clarification and additional specificity to existing rule requirements and to codify necessary steps and requirements associated with the various programs within the EPC's responsibility, and also to update and make corrections to state regulations specifically referenced or adopted within the rule. Next slide, please. As part of our process, Commissioners, and in order to adequately disseminate information associated with the proposed amendments, the draft rule was published to the EPC's website on August 7th, 2023, and 2 public workshops were held, one on August 17th and a second on September 5th. I'd also like to note that additional revisions have been made where applicable and where appropriate based on staff's receipt of comments provided in connection with the public workshops, and that those additional revisions are reflected in the current draft version included as part of your agenda backup and currently posted on the EPC's website. I'd also like to state that on September 6th and September 8th, notice of today's public hearing was published in the Tampa Bay Times and in the La Gaceta, respectively, in compliance with Section 5, subparagraph 2 of the EPC's Enabling Act, Chapter 84-446. And now, Commissioners, the proposed changes. Throughout the rule, language and punctuation corrections have been made.
Excuse me, is there another slide? There you go.
Next slide, please, sorry.
You're good, you're good.
Throughout the rule, language and punctuation corrections have been made, and updates and corrections to references to state regulations have been included. Additional definitions have been included related to the allowable reuse of processed yard trash or mulch in beneficial reuse applications and as relates to the development or redevelopment of historic solid waste disposal areas, commonly known, again, as old landfills. Next slide. Clarification is also provided as relates to all director's authorization application submittals and to all director's authorizations that are issued with respect to the need for timely remittance of authorization application fees, the need for the effective management of stormwater at all authorized sites and facilities, the need for the establishment and maintenance of financial assurance mechanisms at all authorized sites and facilities, and the update also includes conditions which may allow for the extension of a director's authorization's expiration date. Next slide, please. Clarification is provided related specifically to projects within the EPC's Historic Solid Waste Disposal Area Redevelopment Program pertaining to the scope and content of necessary on-site environmental investigations, investigation, monitoring, and mitigation associated with landfill-generated gas at these sites, options for site closure in situations where long-term landfill gas monitoring and/or mitigation is necessary. Specifics are also provided in association with the testing and reuse of recovered screen material at projects where this reuse is proposed, and the need for the legal recording of institutional controls or deed restrictions at these redevelopment sites is also addressed. Next slide, please. The revisions codify, Commissioners, director's authorization exemption criteria associated with facilities that manage and recycle roadway construction material and that manage what are considered to be small volumes of yard trash. Specific criteria are also provided to allow for the beneficial reuse of processed yard trash or mulch, and general requirements are codified regarding the need for the obtainment or generation and retention of documentation by business owners or business operators related to their management of used oil and used oil filters. That's it for the updates, Commissioners, but please note that a typographical error was found and addressed after the submittal of your agenda package information, resulting in a necessary change. Specifically, Section 1-7.202 4L5 as...
Next slide.
Oh, next slide, please. Section 1-7.202 4L5 as currently drafted states that any request for relief from the requirement to provide financial assurance shall be evaluated and processed pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 1-2 Rules of the Commission. Section 1-2.05. The correct citation for the appropriate section of Chapter 1-2, however, is Section 1-2.50, and that correction has been made. The proposed changes having been summarized, Commissioners, it is staff's recommendation that the Commission adopt the proposed amendments to EPC Waste Management Rule Chapter 1-7, which is included in your agenda backup information, with a correction of the Section 1-2.50 reference, and authorize staff to correct any non-substantive typographical errors. At this time, Commissioner, I will do my best to address any questions or concerns that might have come up.
Prior to the board, we take public comment on it. Correct? Do we have any members of the audience that are here to speak on item 8A? This is the public hearing for waste management rules, not the noise pollution rules. Seeing none, I will open up any questions to the board.
I'll just move for approval.
Second.
I have anybody else? I have a motion by Commissioner Kemp and a second by Commissioner Cohen. Please cast your vote.
Thank you,
You
Commissioner.
did a good job,
Motion
Mr. Cohen.
carried,
Thank you,
6
sir.
to 0.
And we will move to item 8B. Mr. Mirani.
Thank you, Commissioner. 8B is to conduct a public hearing considering proposed amendments to the EPC noise pollution rule, Chapter 1-10, Rules of the EPC, and Jeff Sims will be presenting that rulemaking.
Hi, Mr. Sims.
Hello. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jeff Sims with EPC staff. So we're here today to provide an overview of the proposed amendments to our noise rule, also known as Chapter 1-10, for your consideration. Next slide, please. Well, actually, let's get a slide.
All right, you guys got it up there? There you go.
Okay, perfect. All right, great. So as a brief history regarding our rule, it was initially established around 1976 to combat environmental noises from commercial and industrial sources, and it has evolved over time. The rule has been amended periodically, with the most significant revision in 2008. It was last opened in 2012 for a more minor revision, and as such, it's been over 10 years, so we decided to propose amendments to the rule to address some outdated language and to update some exemptions based on experiences we've had in the noise program. So it should be emphasized that the EPC's noise rule distinctly measures against decibel standards. That is different than the majority of local ordinances, which are based on the perception of law enforcement and whether the noise is considered unreasonably loud or raucous. As such, when violations above the standards, while violations can be more defensible, they are also more difficult to acquire due to interferences and difficulty catching a source, which may be intermittent at excessive levels and over a 10-minute average. EPC responds based on the receipt of complaints, and measurements are taken from the receiving property of the citizen, not from the source itself. And this is intended to better document the true impact of the citizen and what they're actually experiencing. And due to difficulties in acquiring clean data, in that EPC is not law enforcement, there are multiple exemptions from our noise rule, and including residential and mobile sources. So a general overview of our outreach, we've held stakeholder meetings that have been ongoing starting over a year ago. There's been over 10 meetings that have been held with the City of Tampa, various Hillsborough County departments, including the Sheriff's Office, the Amphitheater and Fairgrounds, and the Hillsborough County Agricultural Economic Development Council, among others. The proposed rules, including recent revisions, were posted on EPC's website starting in August and included a banner denoting the rulemaking. 2 public workshops were held with website and email notification to over 700 interested parties and businesses, including all registered HOA and civic associations that were acquired through the Hillsborough County Neighborhood Relations. Public notice of the hearings was published in 2 local newspapers earlier this month, as required by Section 5, Parent 2 of EPC Act. And email notification to over 750 interested parties of the revised rules went out last week in response to public comment and consideration. So, as a general overview of the changes, first off, there were several definitions that were updated based primarily on the recommendation of our noise consultants. As mentioned previously, EPC does not regulate residential sources, as the density of urban development makes such monitoring difficult and dangerous and is best handled by law enforcement. Language was amended to include some related sources as exempt. The agricultural language was amended to more directly specify preemptions from state rules and also to recognize the agritourism exemption directly. And the exemption for celebrations related to holidays or special events was updated to remove specific holiday references, such as Gasparilla, and more broadly include those recognized by the various levels of government. The exemption for noise from public athletic facilities and schools was amended, along with the enforceable hours related to construction activity in the county. And this was done to match the Hillsborough County noise ordinance to maintain better consistency. However, we did retain language requiring that construction activities must utilize reasonable precautions to minimize noise even during those exempted hours. And we added language clarifying residential generators as exempt, but that non-emergency commercial generators are subject to our rule. And lastly, we developed maps to replace existing descriptions and references to outside rule in regard to areas where noise from music and entertainment are exempt. These maps include limited downtown areas of the City of Tampa where noise regulation by EPC's rule is currently exempt, along with proposed additional areas within the city. These areas are recommended for exemption due to the concentrated urban nature of those areas, as the data measured by EPC sound monitoring devices may be distorted by multiple noise-generating venues operating simultaneously and by the interferences created from numerous walls and buildings that can cause reflection and diffraction issues affecting the noise data results. The City of Tampa has historically had defined congested areas within their noise ordinance where they enforce their own decibel levels at the source due to potential for noise from the entertainment activities. Our current rule specifies 3 districts, the Ybor City Historic District, the Channel District, and the Central Business District, that have historically been exempt and has been in our rule by reference for the last 15 years. Although the Channel and Central Business Districts have been more recently abolished by the City of Tampa from their decibel standards in their ordinance in the last few years. As mentioned previously, these areas and areas nearby pose problems for acquisition of valid data due to the concentration of businesses and buildings, along with obstacles of dealing with elevated sources and residences. As such, we are proposing a defined geographic area that encompasses those districts along with other areas nearby where noise from music and entertainment would be exempt from our rule. It is shown as the full shaded area on the map. As with the districts currently referenced in our rule, any source within the new proposed area would be exempt from our noise rule. However, it should be noted that the City of Tampa maintains full jurisdiction with regard to enforcement of its noise ordinance within this area and throughout the entire City of Tampa city limits. Seen here is the proposed downtown Ybor area that was just discussed, and we are also recommending the inclusion of a second smaller area within the City of Tampa, and that is the Midtown development over near I-275 in Del Mabry. Lastly, for some general perspective, seen here are maps showing the entire City of Tampa on the left and Hillsborough County on the right, with the 2 proposed exemption areas shown in the shaded areas. As a comparative, the proposed exempt areas comprise approximately 1.7% of the City of Tampa and about 0.3% of Hillsborough County in total. So with that, based on the information provided and as noted on the screen, our recommendation is to adopt the proposed amendments as detailed in the agenda package and authorize staff to make any typographical corrections as needed.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes my portion of the presentation. I believe at this point it's open for public comments, but I'm happy to answer any questions, as you have going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Ms. Murray, are you ready for the first speaker? All right. We'll invite Jeremy Korch. Did I pronounce that right? They're virtual.
Good afternoon. Yes, you did pronounce that correctly. Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Jeremy Korch, and I'm a resident of Tampa Heights. And I am vehemently opposed to the proposed amendments that are set forth and request that the commission deny the proposed amendments, which will degrade the quality of life for all Tampaños, but especially for those of us in or adjacent to the noise exclusion districts. I would ask the commission if these proposed amendments are something that you would want to have instituted in the neighborhoods in which you live, and then to have them written in stone for the next 10 or so years. And I am certain that they are not things that you would want to have imposed in your neighborhoods. If this isn't something that you would want to have forced on you in your neighborhood, why would you want to impose it on other neighborhoods full of working professionals, young families, and people that want to be able to get a decent night's sleep. We are a neighborhood of historic single-family houses. We are not similar to the zones around the arena, Midtown, and other zones like Ybor City. These proposed amendments will deny hundreds or thousands of us in Tampa Heights and Riverside Heights the right to quiet enjoyment inside of our homes, free from intrusive noise. They will make it essentially impossible to enforce noise ordinances in our neighborhood because there will be dueling incompatible standards. We already struggle with noise enforcement in Tampa Heights since the police will always default to non-enforcement of the ordinances if they can get away with it, even with the plainly audible standard. By further muddying the waters as to the correct noise standards that will govern, this effectively does away with any standards for our neighborhood. This, in turn, will probably result in violence from exasperated residents who cannot escape thudding bass generated from inside the exclusion zone that travels outside of it, or from party noise from a neighbor. Just last weekend, one of my neighbors almost got in a fight with an adjoining property because the police didn't break up a raging frat party blaring music after midnight that was audible for blocks. I'm curious to know what residents, as opposed to business owners, may have asked for this amendment. I'm sure the answer is close to zero, if not zero. From what I understand, Soho was originally proposed to be an exclusion zone, but Soho was removed, doubtless because of the rabid backlash that would have resulted. This wouldn't fly in Hyde Park, so why should this fly in Tampa Heights? The residents of Tampa Heights and Ridgewood Park do not want these amendments because we want to be able to sleep at night without our insides vibrating. Please reject these amendments. From earlier construction start times to the Tampa Heights exclusion zone to in-yard amplification outright, the people that run the businesses in our neighborhoods and that are advocating for these changes can flee to their own quiet neighborhoods at night. We want the same right. And I thank you for hearing me out.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Korch. Next, also virtual, we have Lance Fuchs.
Fuchs, yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yes,
Fuchs.
sir. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Lance Fuchs, General Counsel for the Florida State Fair Authority. I'll be brief. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. The Fair Authority supports the changes proposed by the EPC as it relates to the authority, and we'd like to thank and compliment the EPC Director Lorton, Mr. Sims, staff, and General Counsel Rick Marotti. All of them were extraordinarily professional, transparent, and always available for questions during this process. So thanks again.
Thank you, Mr. Fuchs. Next, also virtual, we have Richard Pederica. They're really challenging me.
Chairman, Richard did not call in.
All right. Thank you. We will move on to, just let me know if he does call in before we conclude, please. We will move on to Jason Battle. First, also virtual.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
We can, Mr. Battle. Go ahead.
Wonderful, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jason Battle. I'm also a resident of Tampa Heights. I strongly oppose the proposed amendments that are being discussed and formally request that the Commission deny these changes. Without question, this will diminish the quality of life for those of us in or near the noise exclusion districts and deny us the right of quiet enjoyment in our homes. Tampa Heights and Riverside Heights are neighborhoods full of single-family homes, vastly different from the zones around the arena. To treat them the same is frankly ridiculous. I'm certain that this proposal did not originate from someone living in the impacted areas who would willingly want these changes to go into effect in their own neighborhood. I would venture a guess that the answer is no one, and if the Commission would not want these changes implemented where they live, they should immediately reject these amendments. The answer to addressing concerns over enforcement of noise ordinances is not to remove or loosen them. That only creates more problems and signals that those responsible for limiting noise are abandoning their duties and dumping the problem into our lap without a way to fix it. Please do the right thing and reject these poorly thought out changes immediately. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. And in person, and since I'm batting 1,000, I'm just going to go with Mr. Matt. Hello, sir. Is it sync?
It is. It is. You did good. You did good. Thank you, Commissioners, for allowing me to speak today. My name is Matt Sink. I am a resident of Tampa Heights. I live 2 blocks north of Palm, which is going to be part of the area impacted. I'm coming today and taking out time from my business to talk about something that's really important, which is our ability to enjoy our homes. This community is full of historic homes like mine that was built in the 1930s and 40s. Our homes are simply not designed to deal with the noise and the sounds that come out of entertainment areas. As it is now, when Armature Works does a carnival, my windows, my house actually shake. And it stops us from sleeping, and it stops us from enjoying our home. So I'm asking about the appropriateness of having Tampa Heights included in an area that we never asked for it. It's not like the District Channel where they knew it was going to be an entertainment zone, and they moved in willingly knowing that. We moved into a single-family, quiet neighborhood intentionally, and now the desire of businesses that are coming to our area now are asking us to change our lifestyle so they can profit. The other thing that I would like to discuss today, too, is the methodology of noticing. I found this out through an online post, not from someone giving me notification of the changes in our area. Come to find out that the Tampa Heights Civic Association was not notified in advance. They had the wrong information. So that was kind of challenging for us to get the message out to everybody. Enforcement has already been an issue in our neighborhood. We call the police department, they can't do anything, or they choose not to. So instead, we end up not sleeping at night. And while it's okay during certain holidays, and I enjoy what Armature's brought to my life, I do need to go to work. I do need to sleep. I do need to be able to enjoy my home. And I don't want to tear it down to build a new one just so I can have windows that will not allow the sound into my home at nighttime. So what I'm asking today is rejection or asking them to modify what the plan is. I think that the plan to change these as life goes on is necessary. I just don't think the map, the way it is set out right now, is actually appropriate to put an entertainment zone essentially a block away from historic homes that are not designed, nor do we move in knowing that that's going to be surrounding us in the future. So I appreciate your time today, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sink. Next, also in person, is Susan Johnson Velez. Hello, ma'am.
Hello. Thank you, Commissioner. Susan Johnson Velez. I'm a senior assistant city attorney with the City of Tampa, and I'm here with my colleague, Mike Schmidt. Together, we have been monitoring the proposed noise pollution rule revisions. We met with EPC staff on August 9th of this year. We attended the EPC workshop on August 15th. And we also submitted written comments on behalf of the city on September 1st, which is what your staff had requested. On each of the above dates, Mr. Schmidt and I have voiced the city's concerns with the proposed rule revisions, and specifically the new map that shows the additional exemption areas, Armature Works area all the way up to Columbus Drive, and then the Midtown area that are new exemption areas that have never been exempted from the EPC noise pollution rule previously. If the rule is amended, it would include, these additional areas that would be exempt from the requirements of the rule. And most recently, when we submitted the September 1st comments on behalf of the Tampa Police Department as well as the administration, we detailed our concerns and requested that no new exemption areas be added. Attached to that memo was a resolution adopted by the Tampa City Council on August 31st of 2023. It was Resolution 2023-838. And the version of that was an unsigned version. I do have a signed version that's signed by the chair of the City Council that I would like to submit into the record for this hearing. And I'll just read what was resolved by the City Council in that resolution is that the City of Tampa objects to the proposed exemption areas depicted on Map 1 and Map 2, which are those the additional areas of Midtown and the Heights development that were shown on the draft revision of August 4th of 2023, and the request that the EPC delete those additional exemption areas from the rule changes. And so, again, after we submitted those comments, we received, as part of the notice of this hearing, a new draft revision dated September 14th, and those areas are still on there. So I'm here today on behalf of the City of Tampa to make a final plea with this board to remove those additional exemption areas from the proposed noise pollution rule And we're joining with, the residents that you've already heard from, and we do agree that there would add confusion. It would take away an existing tool from the noise regulation toolbox that we feel is needed. And we would ask that the EPC work cooperatively with us so that our noise ordinance and the EPC's noise pollution rule are more in tandem and more consistent with each other, like they have done with the Hillsborough County noise ordinance to try to remain more consistent with that. We would ask that the same be done with the city's noise ordinance rule. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them, and Mr. Schmidt is also here if you have any questions from him as the one of the legal advisors for the police department.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson-Velez. Are there any other speakers? Is it proper? They're not on the list, but is it still okay for them to speak? It looks like there's one more.
Yes, the commission can accept other speakers.
Come on up, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Brian Seal. I'm a board member of the Tampa Heights Civic Association. I also live on the same street as Matt Sink, who you heard from previously, and I am the immediate past president of the organization as well. I would like to give a little detail to clarify something. I was in the position in 2021 and 2022. In early 2021, I notified Hillsborough County Neighborhood Relations of the change in administration for our civic organization, myself as the contact, which was confirmed. But when the public notice went out, it went to our past president. So that correction, even though we were told, we were not properly noticed about this. Otherwise, we would have done our part. We have monthly meetings. We have hundreds of members and an email list of 800 people. So this would have been a more collaborative, cooperative public engagement had that happened properly, and it didn't. I'd like to shed a little bit of light more as well. We're specifically concerned about the Tampa Heights exclusion zone. When we talk about entertainment districts that are established, such as Ybor City as well as the Arena District, these have large capacity venues that are intended for concerts. Currently, as it's zoned, the Armature Works Master Development has none of those entertainment venues in the current zoning. The noise problems we have regularly do not occur from their normal operations of the restaurants there. They are from special events that are taken up on vacant parking lots that have been undeveloped. That's currently a problem. It's been acknowledged by everyone, including the city, that there are enforcement issues. The city noise ordinance is not doing its job. City Council tried to address this last year and rolled it back. Many people acknowledge and know this is something the city of Tampa has to continue to work on, but by putting this into place today as written, it's effectively creating a very confusing situation. Let's take a step back. Let's take a little bit more time. Let's get this right. Let's work with City Council in Tampa to get their noise ordinance properly working and enforceable, and then follow up. We're putting the cart before the horse if you pass this today. And I think with a little bit more thought, a little bit more public input, we could come up with something that works effectively. I understand where the EPC staff is coming from, and that enforceability and measurability in dense buildings. Tampa Heights isn't there yet. It's not densified. There's only 2 tall buildings built within that Armature Works development. There is time to get this right before that specific property densifies. So I ask just for your thought in this and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sill. All right, are there any other speakers that weren't on the list? All right, then we will conclude public comment and open it up for discussion to the board. I see no one. Commissioner Owen?
Yes, thank you. So as far as us conflicting with the city of Tampa's ordinance, can you enlighten us? Is that the case? Do we have conflicting boundaries with the city of Tampa?
Go ahead, Mr.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. The boundaries are set, they were set in the City of Tampa ordinance several years ago, and they have these, what they call districts, and our rule references those districts as areas that we are exempt from because they were doing their own exemption using decibel standards. So our rule currently is referencing districts that no longer exist because they removed them the last 5 years, within the last year. So there's already an inconsistency there. So one of the purposes on this was to try and eliminate that connection to having to go cite another rule and to just establish a defined geographic boundary where it would be more easily understood. You're either in or you're out when it comes to the EPC's rule.
And as far as enforcement, or go ahead.
I'll just add to that.
Yeah.
So in the areas that aren't defined anymore by the city of Tampa, they use the plainly audible standard as opposed to a decibel-based standard.
Okay.
So it's not that there's a conflict. They use a different
standard.
Different standard.
And when these complaints come in, I mean, they call, people probably call the sheriff's department, or do they call us? How do they use a typical complaint? How does that come into?
Typically, I'm sure they're contacting the City of Tampa Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
If they get them into those complaints.
Okay.
Correct. And I just want to say one of the speakers talked about residential. Residential is covered under the City of Tampa. And we've received a lot of emails where they feel that the City of Tampa, and I think some speakers spoke to that, have not been responsive. But the City of Tampa does enforce and does have their own noise rule for these areas. The same things, the entertainment districts, along with structures and also population density, create these issues where it makes it hard to get a reliable reading from a complainant property.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I guess.
And I did want to note, we did remove. We went from Columbus down to Palm. Somebody was talking about being in the Palm area. We removed a vast section of the Tampa Heights area in the new map.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because you can sometimes deal with these civilly too, right? People get injunctions for these all the time, and I guess they would use the ordinance as a. I guess I'm just seeing how that process goes with us, and then the City of Tampa has an ordinance as well. It just seems having two standards in a particular area just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Mr. Marati, could you enlighten me on that?
Yeah, and that's the idea, is we're deferring to the City of Tampa to let them do their style of enforcement in downtown. We still will regulate for industrial noises and other commercial noises that aren't music related in downtown, because those are not as like you said, it's not two bars next to each other. It's one industrial source.
Right.
It's easier for us to manage. But when you have bars next to each other and such, it makes it really difficult for our decibel meters.
Sure. Okay. Good. That's all I had.
Commissioner Myers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Several spoken regarding to the noise and hearing the noise at home and how it's interrupting their sleep. But this is something that appears that the city and EPC should be able to work together on this issue. And I know we have Ms. Johnson here, and the city submitted a resolution a couple of weeks ago or last month sometime on this issue. And we know that with Midtown, Channelside, the Waterworks, they all are different, different. You got Channelside, you have taller buildings. Ybor City, you have a few taller buildings. But over at Waterworks, it's nothing. It's all just equal. So just hearing the noise all the time, and I think the city of policemen should be able to go to those venues and ask them to quiet the noise at a certain time at night. I mean, I do understand where residents would not want to hear that noise 12 and 1 o'clock, or probably 11:30 if it's a work night. Ask me. I mean, 11:30 that's pushing it if I have to be here at 9 o'clock the next day. But I think this is an opportunity. Maybe we can perhaps table this issue so that the parties could work together and come back with a resolution how they can work together, the city and EPC. Just try and work it out. I mean, I know the policemen might not want to enforce, but we don't have the staff of the number of staff that the city has that can go out to a facility and ask a business to lower the noise, even if it's a special event and that they are on the green space entertaining late at night. I mean, that is something that should be able to be controlled by the city of Tampa. So I'm just asking, possibly, Janet, if there are opportunities.
Yeah, we've tried to avail ourselves of those opportunities. Been working with them for over a year. Had multiple workshops. I mean, the only thing to have a rule go forward is just one notification in a paper. We've been working with the city of Tampa. We've had 3 not only phone calls and discussions with them, but 2 workshops. And no matter what exemption we have that doesn't agree with those, they're against that. So, they put a resolution out, didn't even let us know that they were having a meeting on the resolution, and said we weren't transparent, which we were transparent. And we have reached out to them. So, we're always about working with individuals. We have 1.5 individuals that are here today that enforce our noise rule for the whole county. They have 1,300 policemen. As you see, they're not being responsive already. We'd love nothing more, and we have done it, and we continue to do it to work with the city of Tampa. I'm not sure how fruitful that would be. Again, the residents for the Tampa Heights, perhaps we could, modify that boundary some more, but this is the map that the staff and senior staff feel is the most appropriate for the agency to go forward. But Commissioner, obviously this is your district, and we hear what you're saying. I'm just not sure we could do more than we've done.
Okay.
Frankly.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Kemp.
I was kind of going the same place that you were, Commissioner Myers, and I guess I heard some, but I didn't, I wasn't aware of the long history. I would have, honestly, I guess it struck me as I was sitting here, I would have thought the exemption districts might have been generated by the city of Tampa, but, were you going to say something?
They have been back and forth, and that's the problem. Our rule for 15 years has been one map. Even last year, 18 months ago, they pass a rule, then the next month they rescind the rule, then they have the map here, then they have the map here. EPC is just trying to codify something. So the exemptions have changed over time, and the reality is they're doing zonings for Midtown, for Armature Works, for these areas, for apartment buildings and things that make it difficult for us to even have enforceability by what's going on there. Lots of entertainment and lots of density. I do understand where the Tampa Heights residents are coming from. That's why we moved it from Columbus back to Palm.
The other thing is, and I really appreciate Brian Seal's explanation a little clearer, because the first time I heard was a neighbor was noisy, which I think many of us have experienced, and I would just think that the police would be called generally, like if you have a neighbor's party that's out of control or something, a noise source like that. But then what he said was, and it wasn't usual noise from Armature Works, because it surprised me to hear that, because I've been down there a lot and I haven't really heard that. Not that I necessarily would, as someone in the neighborhood might, behind the single-family homes behind the tall buildings associated with Armature Works, and then there's the residential buildings, and then there's the single-family homes to the north of that. And so I was a little surprised to hear that, because I've been familiar with what went on in Ybor City, and even asked about Skipper Smokehouse in North Tampa, or by Bear or Skipper's years ago, because that was a huge thing up there. And I said, how did that get resolved and unincorporated? And I was even here as an aide to Kathy Castor when we had the huge demonstrations here with the Hard Rock casinos and the Hard Rock Amphitheater, and it was like months and months and demonstrations about how they do the testing and make these rules. So it sounded to me like in the neighborhood, the issue that was an issue was the special events and the generation of sound from those. Those sound like the specific issue that we have here. And I'm just wondering if we might, I understand there's more or less an impasse in negotiations, it sounds like, here between the city and the EPC. And I'm just wondering, too, if we might just have this notice here and kind of like narrow it in terms, it just seems to me it would be a police call and the usual neighbor stuff. But on the special events and things, that might be something that I would just think that the city would deal with, quite honestly. Just, I mean, a time limit, or I'm not sure what the answer is. But I'm just thinking that that might be something that could, if we gave this another month or two, that might give time for the city council to look at this again, and for the neighborhood to talk to them and be aware of this. I don't know. Did you want to respond to that?
The city of Tampa has already heard it we weren't invited, we weren't even told, and a resolution was passed. You know, again, I think Mr. Cohen could probably answer. I guess a special.
Yeah, I was waiting for him. But
He was our city of Tampa guy, but you know, you have a special event, you would think that they would control noise and those type of things. And again, from working with the residents, we can modify the map back to 75, which would then leave 275. I'm sorry, I always get that mixed up. And we have that map available, which would solve this complaint with the armature works. However, though, it's being created by the city of Tampa with these special events, and that's kind of like an unfunded mandate coming to the agency or coming to EPC. I don't know, Commissioner Cohen, do you know how they handle special events?
I'm ready to stop talking. So,
so a couple of things on this topic. I was on the city council for 8 years, and during that time, I represented the district that the Howard Avenue entertainment area is in. And I can tell you, city council passed a number of noise ordinances, and each one would have problems, and then we would go back and try to do it again, and it was very, very difficult. And part of the reason I think that there's been changes in the ordinance over the years and that it hasn't stayed the same is because they've really struggled to try to get it right. And it's a much, much more complicated thing to regulate in real life than it is sitting in a boardroom. It sounds like things have not gone particularly well between the EPC and the city in discussing this. I think, though, to Ms. Lorton's point, the city council is really not under anybody's control. They can pass any ordinance that they want, and they don't have to invite anybody to come and be a part of it. And it may not have even ever occurred to them to do that. But what I would say is that I think we have a couple separate issues here. First of all, Midtown is pretty well contained, and it's a very obviously urban zone that I think could easily be passed the way that you've got it here. It seems to me, though, the road that you just started going down of perhaps moving the line back to 275 might be a good starting point. If maybe we could follow the district commissioner and the Commissioner Kemp's, I think, joint where they were going of perhaps giving this a little bit more time to see if the city and at least the EPC can be better aligned than we are now. I think it would make it easier for us. It would also, I'm very sympathetic to the notice situation that happened with Tampa Heights. We got a lot of emails about this, and it appears that was Hillsborough County's fault. And I think out of deference to that, and by the way, the county, not the EPC, I believe it was the county's fault. And just out of deference to that, I think giving it an extra month or two would be the fair thing to do. And hopefully, I know all of us will try to work with the different players and all this to see if we can come up with something. The fact that the single-family neighborhoods north of Armature Works got sort of webbed into this in the beginning, I think muddied the water a little bit in terms of what it is that you're trying to do. So I think it's good that it's been lowered out, and like you said, if it can be condensed a little more to the expressway, I think that would probably go a long way.
Commissioner, we have the map we can put on the Elmo. I've asked if the Elmo's on or not. I've asked Jeff Sims to put the map up. So, and I concur about, I empathize with the Tampa Heights residents that did not have proper notification because for whatever reason it didn't make it into the relations database. We asked for it in July. We got the most current list, and that's what, again, all we needed to do was publish it in the paper. We've had a year worth of workshops, 3 conversations with the city of Tampa, all these things. And I know what you're saying about the city council, respectfully, they can pass anything they want, but it was these 2 attorneys who brought it forward that we've been working with for over a year that brought it forward for that resolution. So, Jeff, can you show the map to them?
It's up.
Oh, it's up. Oh, there you go. So that takes it back to 275, and that would take armature works completely out, and that would limit it to basically, with the exception of one little piece that really is Ybor City coming into the central business district. This is the map if you wanted to, in deference to the Tampa Heights residents, this is the map that you could approve today along with Midtown, which is the urban setting. And I think that that would be a good resolution. Certainly we want to make sure with the maps move forward, if the maps don't move forward today, that we pass the rest of the rule that we're asking for the clarification. But again, mindful of the agency spent a long time and a lot of outreach creating what we consider to be the best rule that doesn't go back and forth all the time, that doesn't change all the time for our agency. But certainly it's with the will of the board. That's how we'll proceed.
So I'd be happy to try something out as a motion unless anyone else wants to talk again. Yeah.
I would like for Ms. Johnson to come to the mic, since she's representing the city.
Commissioner Owen, are you wanting to speak? I see you in the queue. You're good.
Thank you. How you doing?
Good, thank you, ma'am.
Quick question. Since you've heard our comments, are you willing to go back to the city to see if we table this for a month, to see if you can work with our EPC to bring some resolution where our community, because part of this is in my district.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, again, Susan Johnson-Velez with the City of Tampa Legal Department. Just for the record, yes, certainly we are willing to work with the EPC. I mean, we have been, we were aware a year ago that the rule changes were coming forward, and then were presented with the actual changes, a few months ago, and have reacted to them since then. But we are certainly willing to chat about the areas and have hopefully meaningful discussions with them and provide reasonable, boundaries for these areas. Currently, the areas that are exempt, the Arena District and the Ybor City Historic District, are areas where the City of Tampa measures on a decibel level basis. And so that, the exemption area with EPC was something that was worked out for those 2 areas kind of in a cooperative manner to try to match up the way we measure sound with the way EPC measures sound. These other areas of the city, everywhere else, it's not measured on a decibel level standard. And so again, as other speakers have said, we just think that it would cause confusion in what standard is available to each area, and we're trying to avoid that with the maps. So certainly we're happy to have discussions with EPC and hopefully come back to you with a revised map that meets everybody's needs and desires.
Okay, and one other question. Does a city issue a special permit when it's special events there?
The city does, folks who want to put special events on, the city does issue special event permits for those. And so that is something that we can certainly take back to council and relay this discussion with them and, make sure that they're aware of what your concerns are with special events in this area as well.
Okay, because then they might can put something that controls the noise level at a certain time at night.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yes,
thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Commissioner Owen?
I usually pride myself on keeping my nose out of Tampa, Tampa's business, but this is the EPC. It's not a county commission. It's not the county commission. So, the way I look at this, Ms. Lorton, is that this has been labored over for quite a while, and I don't know from what you're telling me. I don't know what other concessions would make any sense. You mentioned 275 and push it back, but that proposes more challenges to change the map. So to me, I mean, this is EPC's position on the best possible amendments to this rule. Do you see us making any changes after consulting with the city?
Commissioner, we provided that map because we do understand it's not just the city. There's other people that are here today. They're residents, and same with our waste rule. And the city of Tampa, we have worked diligently and with them for decades in a very transparent and collaborative manner. Don't know what went awry after a year's worth of working with them this time when they pushed the resolution through. Staff feels comfortable with that map back to 275, and that would resolve the city's, the Tampa Heights residents and the armature works. But again, if we have to go in the future, obviously we know development's going to come there, high rises are going to come there, entertainment's going to come there, and it will become perhaps, I'm not prognosticating, but more like an EBOR, more like an arena district. But for now, to leave that out, I think that would be reasonable. As far as changing our map after a year's worth of what we felt was very diligent and working with staff, I don't know. I think the map that we have is a good map, and we had a whole map of Hillsborough County. We have 1.5 people here that have to manage that, and as they create these districts with special events, high rises, high density, high entertainment, just understand that we may come back to this board and ask for more personnel to be able to, even if we can enforce it, which is hard to do from the complainant property, to take adequate readings from multiple bars. You can't discern which one it is from the street when the bar's up in the high rise, all of these things. But we feel that, from our perspective, that 275 is reasonable. So I would probably say, from after the resolution came out and after all of our working with them, I'm not sure how fruitful that is, but I will do whatever the board wants to do. But EPC is just putting forward what we think is the best rule for you to vote on today.
Okay, but you're making a concession right now.
We're making a concession back to 275. We could vote on that right now.
I'll move for approval on that with that concession.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cohen, did you need to be?
Well, I'll wait and see if that gets a second or not.
Do we have a second on the
Second.
motion? All right. I have a motion by Commissioner Owen and a motion by Commissioner Cepeda. Before we vote, I want to make a couple of comments that I find. This is a very strange item. I feel it's at odds because we have neighbors that are being affected by something that really we have nothing to do with. The city of Tampa created this issue for you. The city of Tampa won't enforce this issue. Tampa Heights and the city of Tampa argue all the time for more density so that they can promote transit, but then now when they have density, they have issues and complaints with the noise pollution that comes along with that. So it's an extremely challenging position to leave us in. And I don't really understand, we're not addressing the simple fact that it's not being enforced in any of these motions or changes. So I don't understand how this is going to address anything or improve the current environment if we can't find a way to get the actual codes enforced. If we move the line down, can the city of Tampa decide that can they make their own ordinance that says, hey, we're giving a special exemption for this area after the fact and that they're going to exclude them anyways from noise ordinance? Or would this ruling supersede anything that they do as far as noise pollution in that zone?
Yeah, both governments would be independent of each other and they could take different positions. I don't imagine they'd create an exclusionary zone. They've never talked about that, but it's not inconceivable.
Okay. All right. All right. So I will go ahead and take a vote on the motion and the second by Commissioner Cepeda. Are you speaking towards the motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just say I feel uncomfortable because I would like to hear actually what Commissioner Cohen has to say. So I won't vote for this right now. Because I think, and I don't like leaving it in this posture because I don't think it is really addressing the question and the problem and doing what we could. And I do think Commissioner Cohen may have the best handle on this, having had a lot of experience from the city side. So I'm really curious because I really think we need to give a little while to, and I understand the issues, but to give a little while for this to be resolved, not just go with this, concession today, but to see what we might be able to work out. I don't know, Commissioner Cohen, I would just
Yeah, we have a proper main motion and a motion and a second on the floor, so we either need to cast our votes or hear a substitute motion at this point. All right?
Well, when you put it that way, why don't I make a substitute motion,
Okay.
and then we can. So what I would like to do is to go ahead and pass the portion of this that deals with everything other than the boundaries related to the what is now, I suppose, the combined downtown Ybor City district. And what I'd like to suggest is that the EPC move forward with the new map that Ms. Lorton described today that sets the boundary at 275, that the EPC work with the city to get their thoughts on those boundaries, as well as the Tampa Heights neighborhood, which I think deserves an additional right to weigh in here. But then also that the city of Tampa work to develop some standards related to special event permits that we could even talk about here when we consider this fully. And I would suggest that we only delay this for a month or two at the absolute most in order for the parties to come together. And if they can't come together, then we can make a final decision. I agree that to leave it. Well, anyway, that's the guidance.
I'll second that.
Does that work for you, Ms. Lorton? Is that clear? If we pass that?
Certainly, that's whatever the board decides, that's what we will go and do. Absolutely. I think that the Tampa Heights residents, I think that would be valuable for them to have the opportunity to weigh in. And that's not their, unfortunately, there was some glitch with neighborhood services or
Right.
whatever. So we've heard a lot from them. And so, we welcome their input so we can republish the map, and we'll get with the city of Tampa and try and work through their concerns. We'll continue to talk to them.
It's possible that
When is the next meeting?
October 19th.
It's possible the city council may pass a resolution that says something different. It's also possible they do the same thing and then we have to decide. But at least we'll have more information and we will have given it a shot.
So are we going with October 19th?
October 19th would be fine.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll second that.
And can I, clarification for the substitute motion that we were going to pass all the other rule clarifications, definitions, all of that, and we'll just come back just to talk about the map on October 19th?
That is correct, and it's just this map. We're passing the Midtown part, and we're passing the rest of the ordinance. It's just this piece of it that we're leaving till the next time.
And a point of order real quick too, Commissioner Cohen, I thought I heard you saying direct the city of Tampa to do.
Well, we can't direct them to do anything.
We can't direct them.
But
yeah.
we're trying to work together here, and so we're asking that they work.
Yeah,
with
I wouldn't
us.
want them directing our board.
They can direct us, but that we don't have to do it.
Okay, so I have a motion by Commissioner Cohen and a second by Commissioner Kemp. And I will say, Mr. Sills, I was always going to support a delay because, in fact, just a number of weeks ago, this board supported my motion to address our issues with neighborhood relations. Evidently, it is very out of date and has some hiccups, so just bear with us. You do deserve an opportunity to be notified and voiced to City Council on this issue as we work on it.
Absolutely.
All right, and let's cast our vote.
Motion carried, 5-1. Commissioner Owen voted no.
Okay, that concludes our public hearings, correct, Mr. Marotti?
Correct.
All right, moving on to Item 9A of the regular agenda. At this time, we will conduct a final order hearing in the Anderson versus Jurin and EPC case. I will ask our counsel, Mr. Marotti, to explain the process and give us a brief synopsis of the case.
Thank you, Commissioner. And this is a unique process where you'll be sitting as a quasi-judicial body to rule on a recommended order. We actually haven't done one of these with oral argument included in 8 years, 2015. You did one actually in January, but it didn't include oral arguments because at that time the people didn't ask for exceptions. So this one is a little more unique than most of the commission hasn't seen it in this fashion. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the case and then a little bit of background just about the process. So first, Appellee Jurin is a permit applicant who resides in Riverview with a pond in his backyard. Appellant Anderson resides in home 2 doors down from Mr. Jurin on the same pond. Mr. Jurin applied to the EPC for a miscellaneous activities and wetland permit for nuisance vegetation control and a swim access area, and we refer to those permits as MAIWs. You may hear that reference. So what Mr. Jurin asked for, and I'm simplifying, is a strip along his shoreline that he's able to remove invasive weeds, vegetation, and also a 25-foot swim access area that's more perpendicular out into the water, where you can also clear certain nuisance vegetation. The EPC issued the permit granting the ability to remove the nuisance vegetation by any method listed in the permit, which includes hand removal or herbicides, and there's many other conditions like replanting that are required. Mr. Anderson, the neighbor, challenged the permit via a document called an appeal, which is really the initial, it's odd to call it an appeal, but it's the initial challenge of a permit. He objected to the use of herbicides and claiming they're not the least environmentally impactful approach that could be used, plus other conditions, other concerns. EPC appointed a hearing officer, an attorney that has a contract with the EPC named Patricia Petroff to hear the matter. They had a one-day hearing in June, which is the equivalent of a civil trial. And then in late July, the hearing officer, Ms. Petroff, issued a recommended order to the commission recommending that the permit should be issued. Now, these recommended orders are in kind of have three sections, finding of facts section, conclusion of law section, and the recommendation. And in this case, it was recommending issuance of the permit. She ruled in favor of Mr. Jurin and the EPC. The finding of fact is exactly that. The hearing officer hears evidence and stipulated evidence during the hearing and makes those findings, such as Mr. Jurin lives on a pond and Mr. Jurin is agreeing to a 25-foot swim access area. So a lot of findings are listed. And then there's conclusions of law that take the EPC's wetland rules and integrate how those findings, meet with the rules and does the applicant comply with the permit criteria. So the appellant, Mr. Anderson, has the right to file exceptions, or actually any party does, but in this case, Mr. Anderson filed exceptions to the recommended order, and that's intending to point out where they believe there's errors in the hearing officer's job in finding facts and concluding laws. So this case is about arguing those exceptions today to this body. And you'll be tasked with making that final recommended order after you hear their arguments. The EPC Act and rules empower this commission to hear those exceptions, but it's important to note that the commission cannot reject or modify findings of fact that are not supported by competent substantial evidence in the record. Moreover, the commission shouldn't reweigh the evidence or judge one witness over the other and try to reweigh the witnesses. That's not your job. That was the hearing officer's job. So really, you're here to see if there wasn't actually evidence introduced into the record that should have been, or there's some void, if you will. So it's a really high bar for you all to overturn finding of facts. As to conclusions of law, you have a little more flexibility because you're concluding laws that you promulgated, wetland laws you promulgated, so you should have the ability to make sure those laws are interpreted properly and memorialized properly in a final order. So at this point, each party by rule has 10 minutes to give arguments as to the exceptions, not relitigate the whole case. After the oral arguments, or even between each one, you can ask questions of the parties, and then you can ask questions of myself, deliberate, and then hopefully come up with a final order affirming, reversing, or modifying the recommended order. As you heard earlier in the day, but I'll remind all parties, no new evidence can be presented. Arguments should be related to the exceptions to the recommended order. And so at this point, unless there's any questions about the process we can turn it over to the appellant Anderson or his counsel to start the arguments. And if there's ability to have a 10-minute timer, we'd appreciate that.
All right. So, counsel for Anderson. Hello, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Commission, and members of the EPC. My name is Jane Graham, attorney and founder of Sunshine City Law, and I represent Mr. James Anderson in this matter. Mr. Anderson respectfully requests that the EPC Commission rejects and modifies its finding of fact and conclusions of law in the July 27th final order and enter a final order adopting the revisions stated in Anderson's August 7th exceptions to the recommended order. Section 1-235E rules of the EPC require the Commission to reject, reverse, or modify a finding of fact that is not supported by competent substantial evidence in the record. Substantial competent evidence is defined by Florida case law as that is sufficiently relevant and material that a reasonable mind would accept it as adequate to support the conclusion reached. Section 1-235F also provides that the Commission shall reverse or modify the hearing officer's findings of fact and make appropriate conclusions of law, provided that the Commission shall not take any action which conflicts or nullifies any provision of the EPC Act or rules enacted pursuant to the Act. Commission, this is an unusual case with unusual facts, and we're not looking for a referendum on EPC rules. We're just asking that the EPC implements those rules in a way that is required by the plain text of the code. To give some context of the location and the unusual facts of the case, this works? Yeah, so this shows Mr. Anderson's property. What's that? Oh, thank you. Yeah, so this shows Mr. Anderson's property, and that is Mr. Duren's property. And as you can see, Mr. Duren's property extends way into the wetland area. This was provided in the amended complaint. This is a map that also shows a larger perspective of the property, which, as you can see, it is connected to a larger environmental area. This, which was an exhibit in the case, shows that on Mr. Duren's property, there's actually a stormwater structure that has water discharging into the nearby wetland conservation area. And these are photos that were shown during the hearing and accepted into the evidence of baby sandhill crane cults that were on the property, which was testified by both Mr. Anderson and Mr. Anderson's expert witness, Debbie Chayette. Mr. Anderson objects to the MAAW permit because it did not minimize wetland or surface water impacts. And this case hinges on the plain meaning and implementation of the EPC rules under 1-11091C. Specifically, findings of fact 20, 25, 30, and 31 should be rejected because there is not competent substantial evidence to support the finding that the permit minimized wetland and surface water impacts to the greatest extent practicable. Likewise, findings of facts 22, 23, and 25 should be rejected because the permit does not cause there's not competent substantial evidence showing that the permit causes least environmentally adverse impacts. The EPC admitted in their testimony that they did not consider impacts of the permit outside the project area, including impacts to the adjacent forested wetland area, significant wildlife habitat designated by Hillsborough County, Bell Creek, or related stormwater structures draining into the Alafia River. This is under the transcript 9022 to 9116. Section 1-11902 requires that consideration is made of cumulative impacts of the proposed development in the wetland system in combination with other developments that have been proposed in the same drainage basin, and the EPC did not review the permit in combination with other nuisance removal or open water access permits in the same drainage basin. That's in the transcript 102:8 to 19. EPC's own witness, Dessa Clark, testified that hand removal would have to be the least environmentally adverse impact as a treatment method, but EPC said that, well, you know, it creates inconvenient or difficult precedent, but EPC cannot ignore the plain language of its code. EPC admitted under Representative Lee that she did not consider impacts or further investigate the potential of bioaccumulation of herbicides in the pond from the previous unpermitted applications. One other unusual fact of this case is that there had been numerous cases of unpermitted spraying, which was admitted by Mr. Duran during the case. And so what Ms. Chayette, Mr. Anderson's expert, testified to is that EPC should have evaluated the impact of bioaccumulation of what did these herbicides do in the pond. So this is an unusual case. This is not something where you're looking at the impacts of a drainage ditch like on, you know, West Shore Boulevard somewhere. I mean, this is an unusual area. It drains directly into the Bell Creek watershed. Competent substantial evidence demands an honest look at the evidence available. This is Wiggins v. Florida Department of Highway Safety, Florida Supreme Court 2017. And the quote of the case is, "Otherwise, we are asking judges to simply parrot the findings of the hearing officer, thus reducing the task of a constitutional judge to providing a predetermined stamp of approval." So you do have the authority sitting as this board to take a closer look at these findings. There are a number of other findings. It's too long to go into right now. My time is limited, going down to 3.5 minutes. But looking, there is the relevance of unpermitted spraying, findings of fact 6 and 18. And again, there are things in the evidence that shows that this was not supported by reasonable assurance that it was looked at. The other issue, the final issue I want to talk quickly about for the finding of fact is number 19, which should include Debbie Chayette's photographic evidence of roosting Florida sandhill cranes observed on the site. This is extremely relevant because it shows a unique environmental feature on the land that needs to be preserved, notwithstanding the fact that Section 1-1110(3)A expressly exempts MAAW permits for wetlands and waters that serve as significant habitat, such as roosting, nesting, or denning areas. To touch quickly on the conclusions of law section and the exceptions that we look to, and again, there are too many to go into detail, and we do urge you to read through the filings and ask any questions that you have, but under conclusion of law 26, the hearing officer has included an Oxford Leaner's Dictionary definition of significant habitat as large or important. But this is unnecessary, and resulting legal conclusion is erroneous because the EPC rule already describes significant habitat under Section 1-1110(3)A, which says that these activities do not apply to wetlands or surface waters that serve as significant habitat, such as roosting, nesting, or denning areas for state-listed threatened or endangered species. And Ms. Chayette clearly testified that she observed these roosting sandhill cranes on site. When a statute is clear, and this goes to the plain meaning, the courts will not look beyond the statute's plain language for legislative intent or resort to rules of statutory construction to ascertain this intent. Paul v. State, Florida, 2013. Courts refer to dictionary definitions to ascertain the plain and ordinary meaning only when the legislature has not defined the words in the statute. So it was really out of line for there to be a dictionary definition, and it abrogates your rules even as EPC to have that. There are a variety of other exceptions of conclusions of law. One thing that is notable that I'll mention is that EPC staff argues that ultimately this is a policy argument, that they've inserted the idea that we're trying to create some kind of hierarchy of nuisance control methods, which goes beyond the plain text of the rules. And we would say that this is not true, and it is based, we're asking you to look at this by a case-by-case basis, and that the wetland permit should be read in pari materia with the other areas of the code that require least environmental adverse impact. EPC and Mr. Duran have failed to provide the reasonable assurances that are required to support the granting of this permit. And even if they did meet the initial burden, appellant has presented competent substantial evidence by way of his own testimony and Ms. Debbie Chayette, who has 37 years experience, to show that they are not entitled to this permit. Respectfully, we request that you modify and reject this consistent with our exceptions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, counsel. Counsel for the EPC.
I believe Mr. Duran will be presenting first, and then EPC will go.
Okay. Mr. Duran. Mr. Marati, it's all right to flip those two in the script?
Yes, it was left to their discretion to choose who would go first.
Go ahead, Mr. Duran.
I'm a little taller.
We can raise that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Just allows me to see through my glasses. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Council. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today concerning this matter. I'm Brent Duran. I, in fact, do live at 10510 Sedgebrook Drive in Riverview, Florida, and I'm the individual who requested the permit for the pond that's behind my home. I'd like to introduce myself. I'd like to talk a little bit about why I requested this permit and why I requested the use of herbicides to be used on the pond. Throughout this process, I've informed those involved in the process throughout that I simply wanted equal treatment under the law and be authorized the ability to treat my property as others in Hillsborough County are allowed to treat their properties. To begin with, I know that Ms. Graham showed you a picture. I couldn't make that out very well, so I'd like to show you myself on this where we're located. Is that okay? I know he wants me to be where you get it on the mic. So this is a much larger photograph of the homes here. This is my home right here. This is the 75-foot of property that this permit is for. As you can see, this gets much smaller as you go across the pond. This is my neighbor, who has a large portion here, and this is Mr. Anderson's property right here. There's 75 foot between my property and Mr. Anderson's property. I want to give you a quick update of why I want this. I asked for the 25-foot swim access lane, not to swim in the pond because there's been gators and snakes in the pond. I asked for that because I have 9 grandchildren, some of them 4 and over, 5 of those in that age range, that like to fish when they come over to my house. And I would like to be able to see clearly when I walk up to the pond whether or not there's a snake or an alligator at the edge of the pond before my 6, 7, and 4-year-olds cast the bait into the pond. That's the reason I asked for the swim access lane. That's 25 foot. I specifically asked for nuisance vegetation because if you don't treat the pond, the nuisance vegetation will take over the pond. When I first moved into the pond, that house some 20 years ago, it had come to the point that it had pretty much taken over the pond. I was much younger then. My son and I both got out into a little boat and went out with hip waders and manually tried to pull out the nuisance vegetation. We're talking about hours and hours of work. And when you pull that vegetation out, you end up pulling these grasses up, and as you pull those up, you end up pulling the fish that are actually in that vegetation that have beds in there up onto the shore. So you end up killing a lot of the young fish by doing that in reality.
This is outside the evidence.
Ma'am, thank you.
That's a good point. You are treading this testimony that wasn't provided at the hearing.
Okay. Pardon me. I apologize. I'm not a lawyer. I'll try to stay in my lane. If I do, please let me know. The portion on the gators and the snakes and my grandchildren fishing, that's in testimony. I can pull it up. I have the testimony of what I've said before. The fact that I wanted to treat herbicides is because I did do those type of activities in the past. And I recognize I'll be 65 next year. Anybody who, It's hot. This is in my testimony as well. And therefore, I was hoping to use the herbicides because the manual treatment, when you pull it out, it grows back. It's like the grass in your yard. You have to continually do that. We use herbicides on our yard, and I would like to use herbicides in the pond because I think that's more effective in killing those nuisance vegetations. Along those lines, the herbicides, the permit itself only allows me to utilize herbicides that are approved by the Environmental Protection Agency and following the labels, therefore. So there is an actual 14 in the permit, and I don't know if this is on. I'll pop it up here for you folks. I don't know if you can see that. Specifically, all herbicides proposed for the use must be approved for the use of aquatic systems by the Environmental Protection Agency and must be applied in accordance with label directions. I wanted to highlight, I'm retired from the Air Force as an Air Force Intelligence Officer 20 years. I'm a consultant now for the United States government, Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. I know how to follow rules if they know they exist. So this was also in my comments. So I will follow those rules and the directions that are on the labels for applying those herbicides if I'm allowed to do so. I believe that the herbicides just do a much better job. In addition, I highlighted the distance between our homes. If, according to this, that's right, if you'll bring that back up just for a moment, if you'll see a little further down, this states that if, in fact, if native non-intrusive species are removed or destroyed by this treatment, replanting of these species will be required in addition to the replanting required in this permit. Currently, this permit, I went back and forth with the EPC, also in testimony, numerous times with Ms. Chantel Lee to try to determine exactly what the plot should have, how many native plants would have to be replanted, how that would have to be taken care of, the fact that it would have to be done with 30 days after I started. And I've agreed to all those requirements. The permitting process was complex, going back and forth between myself and the EPC to make sure I understand all the rules and followed all the rules. I was issued this permit on 1 December of 2022. I've not been able to treat the pond since prior to that. So this pond is now getting quite a bit of nuisance vegetation in it, and I'm unallowed to treat the pond until a resolution is made on this specific order. I think that the hearing officer heard all the facts, the testimony's there. I testified in that, also took cross-examination in that, and I think that that information was provided. There's been things that have been brought up here today that the hearing officer specifically said could not be considered in the hearing, specifically the sandhill cranes. I will let the legal folks talk to that.
Yeah, Mr. Marati, can we address any of her concerns?
Yeah, Ms. Lee is going to address that, arguing for the EPC, and I will address it later. The hearing officer did rule that the sandhill cranes, that testimony should not have come in because it was not raised in the appeal, but because it became part of the exception, Ms. Graham was allowed to touch on that topic. I'm going to address that later, but...
Okay. It'll be addressed, ma'am. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms.
Okay. So I have 3 minutes left, so let me just state this. I know that it was highlighted here just a few moments ago about some unpermitted treatment of the pond. It's in the testimony that I indeed paid a licensed aquatic agent to actually treat the pond with the agreement of the neighbors at the time for 15 years. I paid $120, $25 a month in order to maintain the pond and paid a licensed individual, aquatic herbicide individual, to come out and treat the pond. Never in those 17 years was there any evidence of any problem outside the pond. I brought up at the hearing that Mrs. Chayette, their expert, highlighted all these problems that come about with this use of herbicides. However, there was not a single instance, and I highlighted this in the testimony, that Ms. Chayette brought forward that was caused by the treatment of that pond during those 17 years. Those comments and all of the evidence you presented was worldwide, and I made the comment that that was not under the auspices of the EPA. So none of that had anything to do with how following the EPA rules would impact those areas. This too is in testimony. So I just want you to know we did in fact touch on these issues in the hearing officer. It's not news today. And I want to thank each and every one of you for this. And I hope that, that at the end of the day, I want to thank you for your consideration of this matter and hope to have a final decision allowing me to move forward with the treatment of the pond as currently authorized in the existing permit. I do appreciate your time, and I look forward to fishing with my grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jern, and thank you for your service. All right, we will have the counsel for the EPC up next.
And commissioners, I will echo that. His argument, and it was not testimony, his argument regarding juvenile fish being pulled out of the water, that was never in the hearing and it should be disregarded.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I am Beth Lee with the EPC Legal Department, representing the Executive Director and staff in this final order hearing. EPC's initial response to appellant's exceptions to the recommended order is that they should be rejected as untimely. Pursuant to Section 1-2.35a, parties may file exceptions to the finding of fact and conclusions of law within 10 calendar days of recommended order. The hearing officer rendered that recommended order on July 27, 2023, meaning the exceptions needed to be filed by 5 p.m. on August 7, 2023, based on Florida Rules of Judicial Administration for computing time and Section 1-2.01 EPC procedure rules, which states that all documents received after 5 p.m. are considered received the next business day. Appellant's exceptions were filed after 5 p.m. on August 7th and thus should be considered to received on August 8th and should be rejected. But for the sake of argument, I will respond to appellant's exceptions presented to you today. Ms. Graham argues that many of the findings of fact should be rejected because they fail to meet substantial competent evidence. As she correctly indicated, it's such relevant evidence as a reasonable mind would accept as adequate to support a conclusion. But further, it's for the hearing officer, as Mr. Marati indicated, to weigh that evidence, resolve conflicts, judge credibility, and draw permissible inferences from that evidence. But further, substantial competent evidence does not relate to the quality, character, or convincing power. Rather, it refers to the existence of some evidence, so the quantity, as to each essential element and its admissibility. Because of this, it is a high threshold. And in simple terms and in summary, substantial competent evidence is reliable, relevant, specific, lay fact-based testimony or expert testimony based on discernible chain of reasoning. Ms. Graham argued a few findings of facts in her exceptions. Specifically, I'd just like to reiterate that finding of fact 20 is found on transcript page 77 through 79, along with 22 is on that same set of pages. Finding of fact 23 and 25 are all found on transcript page 81 through 83, and finding of fact 30 and 31 are both found on transcript page 85 and 86. As identified earlier, it is relevant evidence as a reasonable mind would accept as adequate. So as long as it's found in the record, it generally meets a substantial competent evidence threshold. The MAIW permit and conditions provide the reasonable assurance that it met EPC rules, specifically 111. Here, Ms. Graham is asking for the battling of the experts. She's asking you to reweigh the testimony by indicating her expert testimony in her arguments, but that was what the hearing officer did. She weighed the evidence of EPC's experts, of Ms. Graham, Mr. Anderson's expert witness, Ms. Cheyette, and she made her findings of fact based on that. The testimony by staff was in their experience of permitting MAIWs and reviewing the subject site and proposed activity, and they opined in their expert opinion that the MAIW permit and permit conditions provide reasonable assurance. Specifically, these are found on Ms. Lee's testimony on page 85 and 86 of the transcript. Regarding the cumulative impacts that Ms. Graham briefly discussed in her argument, the record supports this finding of fact because EPC staff testified that an in-depth cumulative analysis is not required for this type of activity. Ms. Graham is arguing an interpretation not required by EPC rules or SOPs to conduct an extensive review of all surrounding water bodies and habitats for a single project of removing nuisance vegetation and implementing a swim and open water access. Specifically, Ms. Lee testified to this on page 76, lines 1 through 11 of the transcript. Further, Ms. Clark also testified to this on page 37, lines 3 through 6, that cumulative impacts are for the proposed development, not for the proposed method of treatment. Findings of fact 6 and 18 was briefly touched upon in Ms. Graham's argument, and she requests the modification of these findings of fact. Specifically, she requests modification that the hearing officer's findings of fact that EPC expert Chantel Lee reviewed the history of the project site and history of the folio parcel and aerial imagery. Appellant, the finding of fact stated in number 6 is directly supported by competent substantial evidence in the record, specifically transcript pages 72 through 75 of Ms. Lee's testimony. Appellant does not argue that the finding of fact 18 regarding the history of unpermitted spraying should be overturned, but essentially she's asking the commission again to reweigh the evidence and modify the finding. But that was the hearing officer's job, to weigh the evidence between the expert testimony. Notably, finding of fact 18 was inferred by the hearing officer that no evidence in the record supporting any bioaccumulation of herbicides in the pond. Ms. Graham points to expert Chayette's testimony on pages 178 through 179. However, she is asking you to reweigh the expert's speculative testimony as to whether bioaccumulation occurred because soil analysis and other documents supporting that testimony were not conducted or submitted. EPC staff testified that EPC rules do not require the review of prior noncompliance. This is on transcript page 50 and 94 through 95, and determining the permit provides reasonable assurance the activity meets rule criteria. As such, EPC requests these findings be affirmed by the commission, but it is important to note that removal of finding of fact 18 would likely not change the outcome of the hearing officer's recommendation. Again, Ms. Graham requests modification of hearing officer's finding of fact 19, but as Mr. Marati indicated, there'll be clarification on that. The hearing officer sustained an oral objection concerning information of the alleged sandhill crane as a fact issue not previously disclosed in the amended appeal, discovery, or pre-hearing stipulations. Specifically, the hearing officer ruled that the introduction of sandhill cranes was just limited to the photograph, not to Mrs. Chayette's testimony. This is on transcript page 152 and 153. Further, there was a subsequent motion for reconsideration that was denied by the hearing officer on July 25th. So under Florida law, a stipulation that limits the issues to be tried, so in this case our joint pre-hearing stipulations, amounts to a binding waiver and elimination of all other issues not included. As such, because the fact issue of significant habitat and the testimony related to sandhill cranes was properly not considered by the hearing officer and only given its face value. The EPC rules prohibit the commission from taking action that would conflict with or nullify the EPC rules. As it relates to the rule interpretation, appellants' arguments that hand removal is the least environmentally adverse impact essentially nullifies a significant portion of the nuisance vegetation control activities because with that interpretation, no other removal method would be permissible. Ms. Graham's argument, if it prevails, would lead to a nullification of nuisance vegetation control in all methods but hand removal, and would lead to the inability to control certain nuisance vegetation, such as Brazilian pepper. Staff testified to this when asked strictly to interpret whether hand removal was the least environmentally adverse method of wetland vegetation removal. And when their response was, I would expect at that point we would always require hand removal. That's on transcript page 44. This interpretation would set a poor precedence. Not only would this interpretation affect the nuisance vegetation control and swim and open water access activities as challenged in this permit, but it would also The interpretation that Section 111.09(1)(c) requires that method to cause the least environmentally adverse impact would also affect various other MAIW activities that involve removal of vegetation, such as aquatic plant control, which was formerly whole lake treatment. As such, we request the Commission affirm the conclusions of law made by the hearing officer without modification. And that rationale goes to the conclusions of law 22, 23, and 24 as argued by Ms. Graham in her exceptions and reiterated again today. The plain language of our rule, staff testified, it does not specify what method has to be used. The applicant discloses what method they intend to use, and sometimes they do ask staff what method might be best. So, for example, staff might tell them you should use a combination of methods to adequately treat a nuisance vegetation such as Brazilian pepper. So having the interpretation that hand removal is the only method to give the least environmentally adverse impact or minimization is very limiting for staff. And lastly, again, for the conclusions of law regarding the sandhill cranes, we simply request that the Commission adopt the hearing officer's conclusions of law and not make any modifications or rejections as argued by Ms. Graham. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Counsel. Okay, now that we have heard the parties, does the Counsel for the Commission have a recommendation?
Yes, Commissioners, and I'm going to touch on that topic of the sandhill cranes one more time. The appellant never in their appeal mentioned that they were going to be arguing about significant wildlife habitat in their appeal. And then when it came to time to stipulate to what facts would be litigated many months later, what would be litigated, they never included that in their stipulation of what would be at fact. So then at the hearing, they raised the issue. Hence, the hearing officer objected to that coming in. They did allow the one photo of the cranes, but the issue of it being significant habitat should not have been an issue at the hearing. And it was improperly raised at the hearing. So part of my recommendation to you all, and I have gone thoroughly through the transcripts and all the filings just to make sure that every finding of fact is supported by competent substantial evidence and the conclusions of the law are appropriate and do not overturn the laws or fly in the face of the EPC's laws. So with that, Commissioners, my recommendation to you is to uphold the hearing officer's recommended order with two changes. One, finding of fact number 3 has an improper folio number. It's a very nuanced issue, but they all stipulated to the folio number. But when you look at the evidence they put in the record, there's actually a different folio number that should be the appropriate one for Appellant Anderson's address. Also, in that same stipulated fact, and I'm not asking you to overturn this one, they reference Mr. Anderson being west of Mr. Jern, but actually he's, I apologize, Mr. Anderson owns upland property east of the property when actually he's west. That was stipulated to, so we can't overturn that. They all agreed Mr. Anderson is east of the property when actually he's west. I'd like to make a note, but not actually change a finding of fact in that case. But the key thing that I'm recommending to the Commissioners is that regarding the conclusion of law number 26, that deals with a significant habitat, that the conclusion of law be maintained in the recommended order as is, but appended or added to state that even though the hearing officer found that it wasn't significant habitat, therefore the permit should issue, I think there should still be a reminder in there, a conclusion in there that this issue shouldn't even been heard because they never raised it in their appeal, and that sets a bad message to future cases if people are allowed to bring new issues in the middle of a hearing when they didn't put it in their appeal. So I think we need a note in there. So that's a little bit of rambling, so I apologize for that, but so my recommendation is approve the recommended order, change finding of fact number 3 just to correct a folio number for Mr. Anderson's property, and then to append conclusion of law number 26 regarding that issue of only raising proper issues that are in the appeal.
Okay, thank you very much. I will open it up to any comments or questions from the Commission. Commissioner Owen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, counselors, for preparing so well today. I know what that's like. Keeps you up late at night. As to the conclusions of law, which I was kind of focused on, the rule 1.11091C that they reference gives the discretion to the hearing officer as to what would be minimize the wetland impact. Is that how that?
From all the evidence that the hearing officer hears, she can determine what is considered of nominal consequence. I want to make sure I'm looking at the right rule that you just referenced. You said 1-11.
1.11091C.
Yes, that is the provision that allows the EPC to issue these MAIW permits, and in that case, they have to determine if there's minimization of the impacts, but that's done through all the conditions that were put in the permit to make sure they were minimized.
Okay. And counsel for appellant also referenced that we were using a wrong definition of significant habitat. Is that something that was weighed? I think the counsel stated that we were using an improper definition rather than the rules.
No, I did not agree with that
Okay.
characterization that it was improper. It was the hearing officers relying on what is considered significant habitat and try to give more definition as to what is significant habitat.
Good. Okay, that's all I had.
Well, I see no one else in the queue,
Well,
so
I'll move then if no one's in the queue. I move to affirm the recommended order with changes to finding of fact number 3 as to the folio and as to the conclusion of law number 26, consistent with the recommendations by Mr. Marotti.
Second.
all right. I have a motion by Commissioner Owen, a second by Commissioner Meyer. If there's no other comments, go ahead and cast your vote.
Motion carried 6-0.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay, thank you very much. We will move on to item 9B of the agenda, which is the 2023 EPC Annual Report. Director Lorton.
Thank you, Commissioner. I would like to state it's about 2 hours and 15 minutes here.
Oh, I'm aware.
And you guys have you have a budget meeting following this. I did offer to the chair that I could take, depending on the preference of the board, 9B and 9D and move them to October. And that would just leave you to deal with 9C today, which is the executive director evaluation process, which Elaine DeLue would go over. If that's something you want to do, we have a lighter meeting in October. We have this new noise rule that will be coming back. But again, we've cleared a lot of items off. So if the board's amenable to that, we'll just move to 9C.
Yes.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Meyer, second by Commissioner Owen to move those two items. Cast your vote.
Motion carried 6-0.
And moving on.
Okay, and with that, again, I will recognize Elaine DeLue, and she will go over the executive director annual evaluation process, which will come back to you in October.
Commissioners, this will be a brief review of the evaluation process of the performance of the EPC Executive Director, Janet Lorton. Per the employment agreement, the Commission is to evaluate her performance annually in October. In preparation for the annual evaluation, you were provided with the performance evaluation form and the agenda backup. The Executive Director will provide a self-evaluation with a list of EPC accomplishments to assist the Commission in measuring her performance. She would also welcome personal meetings with any Commissioner. So please complete the evaluation form and return to me by October 9th. The results will be compiled and presented during the following EPC meeting in October for discussion. Any questions, please let me know.
Okay, any questions from the board on the evaluation process? Do you need anything from us? Receive a report or no vote on this item?
No vote.
Okay. If there's nothing else, then we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.